Alright, wave again, please.
There's 8 of us.
Yeah. I'm over here.
1, 2, 2.5, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
6.
There are 8 of them.
You keep going.
It's a good spot to honor you.
Alright, so recently invasive species have became a huge problem for the South Florida ecosystem. And alright, so this picture has been circulating the internet for some time now, and it depicts a Burmese python in the Everglades eating or attempting to eat an American alligator. Now these two animals, they come from very different parts of the world. The Burmese python is native to Southeast Asia, and the American alligator calls home here in southeastern United States. But recently, due to the pet trade, Burmese pythons have created a stable population here in South Florida, and they cause a lot of havoc through eating and preying on many endangered species of wading birds and mammals that live in the environment that they are taking up now. And so, not all non-native species that live in like an invaded area are considered invasive species. What makes a species invasive, according to the Fish and Wildlife Services, is that species has to have a stable population. It has to be hurting native species through predation, competition of resources, or just changing the ecosystem. So Burmese pythons, Nile monitors, Argentinian tegus, they all prey on native mammals such as like marsh rabbits. They prey on wading birds, and there's species like the nutria, which are ravenous eaters of the vegetation in like the swamps. And with the amount of vegetation that they eat, they completely change the ecosystem, making it not a viable place for the native species to live in anymore. And but what can also make a species invasive is causing economic damage. So the mock parakeet, it's a bird from South America, and they create large colonial nests in these power lines, and they can cause power outages to many neighborhoods in South Florida. There's also a bacteria called the citrus canker, which takes over like citrus farms, and it cuts the yields that they produce like dramatically. So it really is affecting the important citrus industry in Florida. So what's being done about these invasive species? So just recently, within the past 2 or 3 years, the Congress has added amendments to the Lacey Act. Now the Lacey Act is it's a series of different amendments that are imposed to stop trade and sales of certain species of animals for conservation. But recently they added an amendment that stops certain species of exotic animals such as the Burmese python, boa constrictors, and many other species of exotic animals from crossing state lines. Now they did this to keep them out of Florida, where they are able to create a viable and stable population. And so that recently has stopped a lot of the pet trade for these animals. Now the FWC also does what's called pet amnesty days, because many of these animals have created a stable population through being released into the wild from their pet owners. And so what this pet amnesty day does is, if you're a pet owner and you decide that you don't want this animal anymore, you can't take care of it, you can turn it over to the FWC, and they don't ask any questions. They take it in because they would much rather you give it to them than release it out into the wild. And for certain species such as the lionfish, Burmese pythons, and Nile monitors, what they do, the FWC commissions a regulated hunt where just regular citizens can go and hunt these animals. They do barbecues with them afterwards, and they do this to seriously cut the populations down. And they also want to get citizens in South Florida involved by, if you do see a non-native species, then you should report it and let them know where the populations are. So pretty much what we've talked about is how a species becomes invasive, what invasive actually means, and what is being done about these invasive species. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
So you talked a little bit about the Lacey Act, but was it a problem, was the issue before that like say Georgia had lax, very passive invasive species laws, so pet owners would have invasive species and then release them and they would cross over the state lines to Florida where there may have been stricter invasive species laws? Or what was the inspiration for that, those amendments to the Lacey Act?
Well, the biggest thing is within the pet trade, especially the reptile pet trade, since reptiles are such hardy animals, you can go online and buy a reptile. If you're in Florida, you can buy one from California, have it shipped overnight, and it's easy to do that. So the Lacey Act stops that because you can't ship it over state lines anymore. So
for shipping.
There are many like reptile expos and exotic animal expos where big breeders from all around the country come in. So prior to that, they were able to bring in like their Burmese pythons, their rock pythons and whatnot, and take them into Florida. And South Florida has the biggest problem in the United States with invasive species because it is such a subtropical climate, and it is a perfect climate for these invasive animals. So it's not as big of a problem in these other states. It was mainly just for the South Florida problem.
Is it only animals that can be invasive, or can plants also be invasive?
No, plants can be invasive as well. That's another main problem is, like, I know with the Chinese tulip, it causes a huge problem in places. But plants could, there are many like invasive species of plants all throughout. It's mainly animals that are the big problem in South Florida. Like just in South Florida, there are many invasive plants. Like
threat.
Yeah.
Are these like protected hunts actually like doing something, like causing like real help for this problem?
It is, but especially with Burmese pythons, because though that species is probably getting the most attention drawn to it because it's a huge snake. They can get up to like 20 plus feet, and nobody really knows how many actual individuals are in the Everglades in South Florida. There are estimates from 3,000 to 100,000, so which is a huge range. So people don't really know if these hunts are making serious impacts or not with that species. I know with lionfish, the hunts are, because lionfish are definitely easier to spot. They're less elusive than Burmese pythons, so it's easier to catch and hunt them. So they are making a big difference with lionfish.